Just hear me. I lost everything.
Stay back. People are watching us.
Leave now. I won't be shamed in my own home.
Please, don't do this in front of everyone.
Kondwani Phiri lay silently on the cold pavement outside the mansion he had built with decades of sacrifice. His expensive suits were gone, replaced by torn clothes and worn sandals. Standing at the gate, his wife Thandiwe pointed at him with burning contempt. "Take your filthy rags and leave. I will never live with a beggar." Laughter rippled through the wealthy neighbors as security guards dragged him away. No one noticed the quiet tears in his eyes or the painful truth hidden behind his disguise. Within days, the entire city would discover that the man they mocked had never lost his fortune. But by then, one woman's choice would cost her far more than money. It would cost her the only love she could never buy. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from and what time it is in your country. We'd love to know how far this story has traveled. And if you enjoy emotional stories about justice, hope, and second chances, please subscribe and join our growing family. The skyline of Lusaka shimmered beneath the first light of dawn, its glass towers reflecting the promise of another prosperous day. Thousands of workers hurried through crowded streets. Taxis weaved between buses, and roadside vendors prepared fresh fruit long before the city's executives stepped into their polished offices. Hidden behind the noise and movement was one name that almost everyone knew: Kondwani Phiri. To the public, he was one of Zambia's most respected businessmen, the founder of a vast transportation and agricultural empire that employed thousands of families across the country. Newspapers admired his business instincts. Television hosts praised his investments. Politicians sought his advice. Yet few people understood the man behind the success. Every morning before any board meeting or financial report, Kondwani followed the same quiet routine. He woke before sunrise, brewed his own tea, and spent nearly an hour sitting alone on the terrace overlooking the gardens of his Lusaka home. He rarely touched his phone during that time. Instead, he watched the gardeners trimming flowers and listened to birds singing from the jacaranda trees. Those peaceful moments reminded him of a very different life. Long before private jets and luxury estates became part of his world, Kondwani had grown up in a tiny village where hunger visited more often than comfort. His father had died while Kondwani was still a child, leaving his widowed mother to raise 3 children by selling vegetables in the local market. Some evenings, there was enough food for everyone. Other nights, she quietly claimed she was not hungry, so her children could eat. Even as a boy, Kondwani had noticed the lie. He never forgot the sight of his mother pretending to smile while drinking only water during dinner. That memory became the fire that drove him through every obstacle. He studied beneath kerosene lamps when electricity was unavailable. He walked several kilometers to school every day because bus fare was a luxury the family could never afford. He worked odd jobs throughout university, sleeping only a few hours each night, while dreaming of building a business that could change not only his own future, but also the lives of others. Success did not arrive quickly. His first transport company nearly failed within 2 years. His second investment ended in disaster after severe flooding destroyed crops across several provinces. Friends disappeared when money became scarce. Banks refused additional loans. Even relatives questioned whether his ambitions were foolish. Only persistence remained. Years later, persistence transformed into opportunity. Opportunity became prosperity. Prosperity became an empire. Yet despite everything he owned, Kondwani never believed wealth made someone important. Character did. That belief shaped the way he treated people. Drivers, cleaners, receptionists, mechanics, and security guards often found him greeting them by name. When employees faced family emergencies, he quietly covered hospital bills without asking for recognition. Scholarships bearing anonymous donations had helped hundreds of children continue their education. though very few knew the benefactors sitting behind those gifts. Ironically, the one place where Kondwani no longer felt understood was his own home. His marriage to Thandiwe had once been filled with laughter. Years earlier, before the luxury cars and grand mansion, they had shared a small apartment where leaking ceilings and unreliable electricity had been ordinary parts of life. They cooked together in a tiny kitchen. They celebrated simple victories with inexpensive meals. Every dream seemed possible because they believed they were building it together. Back then, Thandiwe had admired Kondwani's determination more than his income, or at least he had believed she did. As the years passed, something slowly changed. It happened so gradually that neither of them noticed at first. The modest apartment became an elegant home. The elegant home became an enormous estate. Vacations became international. Dinner conversations shifted from family dreams to exclusive events, luxury brands, and influential acquaintances. Their evenings together became increasingly rare. Sometimes they sat in the same room for hours without speaking, beyond polite questions. "How was your meeting?" "Busy." "Did you eat?" "Yes." Those brief exchanges replaced the long conversations they once treasured. Kondwani often blamed himself. Perhaps he had spent too much time expanding his companies. Perhaps success demanded sacrifices he had underestimated. Perhaps he had mistaken providing comfort for providing companionship. But over the previous year, another possibility had begun troubling his heart. What if Thandiwe no longer loved the man? What if she only loved the life? The question haunted him more than any business negotiation ever could. One evening, after returning earlier than expected from a conference, Kondwani paused outside the drawing room when he heard voices inside. Thandiwe was entertaining several close friends. They laughed freely, unaware that he had arrived. "I honestly don't know how some women survive after marrying unsuccessful men," one guest remarked. Another chuckled. "I would never spend my life struggling." Then Thandiwe answered, "You have to be practical. Love is beautiful, but comfort matters. I worked too hard to return to poverty." The room erupted with soft laughter. Kondwani remained perfectly still. He wanted to believe there was more to her words. Maybe they lacked context. Maybe he misunderstood. Yet something inside him felt strangely heavy. He quietly turned around before anyone noticed him and walked back outside. That night, he barely slept. Over the following weeks, the uneasiness only deepened. He noticed how eagerly Thandiwe prepared for charity galas attended by influential people, but showed little interest in visiting villages where their foundation funded schools. He watched her excitement over expensive jewelry exceed the joy she once found in simple evenings together. He observed how often conversations revolved around reputation rather than gratitude. None of these moments alone proved anything. Together, however, they formed a painful pattern. Still, Kondwani refused to judge her unfairly. He desperately wanted to believe his fears were wrong. One afternoon, he invited his oldest legal advisor, Beatrice Soko, to his office. She had worked beside him for nearly 20 years and understood him better than almost anyone. After listening silently, she folded her hands. "You don't want to test her because you expect failure," she said gently. "No," Kondwani answered after a long pause. "I want to test our marriage because I'm terrified that I've already lost it." The office fell silent. Outside the window, employees crossed the courtyard carrying files and greeting one another, completely unaware that the man responsible for thousands of livelihoods was wrestling with a heartbreak no financial success could solve. For the first time in his life, Kondwani realized that discovering the truth might hurt far more than living with uncertainty. And yet, without the truth, he feared his marriage had already become nothing more than a beautiful illusion. The following Saturday evening, the grand ballroom of the Royal Jacaranda Hotel glowed beneath crystal chandeliers as Lusaka's elite gathered for one of the city's most anticipated charity galas. Luxury cars lined the entrance, photographers captured smiling couples, and conversations floated effortlessly between business opportunities and lavish vacations. Kondwani Phiri stepped through the entrance with practiced elegance. She wore an emerald-green designer gown that shimmered beneath the light's diamond earrings resting against her neck, as though they had always belonged there. Heads turned almost immediately. Some admired her beauty. Others admired the fortune everyone believed surrounded her. She smiled graciously. She knew exactly how to hold a champagne glass, how long to maintain eye contact during conversation, and how to laugh at the right moments. Years earlier, these formal gatherings had intimidated her. Now they felt like home. Kondwani couldn't make it again, asked Chikondi Zulu, her closest friend, embracing her warmly. He had another board meeting, Kondwani replied with a small sigh. Chikondi rolled her eyes. That man works too much. He says the company needs him. It always needs him, Chikondi answered. One day he'll realize that money should serve life, not consume it. Kondwani forced a smile. If only things were still that simple. As the evening progressed, influential businessmen, politicians, and executives gathered around polished tables discussing investments worth millions of dollars. The conversations fascinated Kondwani, not because she understood every financial detail, but because she loved being part of that world. She enjoyed hearing people speak respectfully when Kondwani's name entered the discussion. She enjoyed watching doors open effortlessly, simply because she carried the surname Phiri. She enjoyed belonging. At another table sat her older brother, Moses Banda. Unlike Kondwani, Moses had never built anything substantial himself. Instead, he possessed a remarkable ability to position himself close to successful people. He always dressed impeccably, spoke confidently, and rarely missed an opportunity to benefit from someone else's achievements. Spotting his sister, he walked over, carrying 2 glasses of sparkling water. "You look like the Queen of Lusaka tonight," he said. Kondwani laughed softly. "You exaggerate." "I don't." He lowered his voice. "Do you know why everyone here greets you with such respect?" She smiled politely. "Because they're kind." Moses chuckled. "No." He leaned closer. "Still, they respect power. Never forget that." His words lingered in her mind. "The world isn't fair, Kondwani," he continued. "People admire success. They follow wealth. Once those disappear—" He shrugged. "So do friends." She frowned slightly. Kondwani would never say something like that. Kondwani still believes everyone has a good heart. "And you don't." "I believe people reveal themselves when money disappears." Before she could answer, another guest approached, interrupting the conversation. Yet Moses' words quietly settled inside her thoughts. Later that evening, Chikondi joined them near the balcony overlooking the city lights. "You know," Chikondi said while watching expensive cars arrive below, "sometimes I wonder what we'd all do if life suddenly changed." "What do you mean?" Kondwani asked. "I mean, imagine waking up tomorrow and discovering everything was gone." Kondwani laughed dismissively. "That could never happen." "It happens. Not to Kondwani. Everyone says that before it happens." Moses nodded. "Exactly." Then, almost casually, he asked, "If Kondwani lost everything, would you still stay?" Kondwani stared at the lights beyond the balcony. For several seconds, she remained silent. Finally, she answered, "I honestly don't know." Neither Chikondi nor Moses spoke. Perhaps they expected her to laugh and dismiss the impossible question. Instead, she continued quietly, "I grew up watching my mother struggle every single day. We had nothing. I promised myself I would never return to that life. But that's not what I asked, Moses said. She looked away. I love my husband. Another silence followed. But, she hesitated. I don't think I could survive that kind of poverty again. Moses slowly nodded, almost satisfied. I understand. Chikondi offered no opinion. Yet neither woman realized that someone standing just beyond the partially open balcony doors had heard every word. Kondwani. He had arrived late after finishing a board meeting. His intention had been simple: surprise his wife, dance with her, spend one peaceful evening together. Instead, he stood motionless listening as the woman he loved admitted that poverty frightened her more than losing him. She never said she would abandon him, but she never said she wouldn't. The uncertainty pierced deeper than certainty ever could. Without entering the ballroom, Kondwani quietly turned away. No one noticed him leaving. The drive home felt unusually long. The city lights blurred beyond the car windows, while memories filled his mind. He remembered the tiny apartment where they once celebrated buying their first refrigerator. He remembered Thandiwe encouraging him after failed investments. He remembered promising her that no matter how wealthy they became, they would never let money change who they were. When had that promise begun fading? Had success changed her? Or had success simply revealed something that had always existed he didn't know? And that uncertainty hurt the most. The following Monday, Kondwani requested a confidential meeting with Beatrice Soko and his longtime operations director, Lamek Kalaba. Both had stood beside him since the earliest days of the company. Once the office door closed, Kondwani spoke calmly. I need your complete honesty. You have it, Lamek answered immediately. I intend to disappear. The room fell silent. Beatrice adjusted her glasses. For how long? Long enough to discover who truly stands beside me. Lamek frowned. Sir, are you certain? No. Then why do it? Kondwani looked through the office window toward hundreds of employees working below. Because living with doubt is becoming harder than facing the truth. Beatrice spoke carefully. If you move forward, everything must remain completely legal. It will. No fraudulent bankruptcy. None. No deception involving shareholders. Never. Kondwani explained his plan. Publicly, he would announce that a series of disastrous overseas investments had frozen most of his personal assets. His businesses would continue operating under independent management, but strict confidentiality agreements would prevent anyone from revealing his actual financial position. Only 3 people would know the complete truth: Beatrice, Lamek, and Kondwani himself. He would quietly leave his mansion, remove every symbol of wealth from his appearance, and return weeks later, looking like a man whose life had completely collapsed. He wasn't testing money. He was testing hearts. Not only his wife's, his relatives, his friends, his executives, his employees, even himself. Lamek finally broke the silence. And if the truth breaks your heart? Kondwani smiled sadly. Then at least I'll finally know I was loving reality instead of an illusion. Far away, completely unaware of the decision that had just been made, Thandiwe spent the afternoon browsing luxury boutiques with Chikondi. She laughed. She admired expensive handbags. She planned another charity luncheon. She never imagined that within a few weeks, every comfortable certainty in her carefully constructed world would begin to crumble. Because while she believed fortune was permanent, Kondwani was preparing to remove every visible sign that he had ever possessed it. And the greatest test of their marriage had quietly begun. Morning sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Phiri mansion, casting long golden beams across marble floors that gleamed like mirrors. The house was unusually quiet. The gardeners trimmed hedges outside. Housekeepers polished furniture that hardly anyone touched. Everything appeared perfectly ordinary. Only Kondwani knew it was the last morning he would spend there as himself. He stood alone in his dressing room, looking at the wardrobe that reflected nearly 30 years of achievement. Tailored Italian suits hung neatly in rows. Polished leather shoes sat beneath them. Designer watches rested inside velvet-lined drawers. One by one, he closed each drawer without taking anything. Instead, he packed a small canvas travel bag with only a few ordinary clothes, a worn jacket he had kept since his university days, basic toiletries, and an old Bible that had belonged to his late mother. He paused before the framed photograph on his bedside table. It had been taken 24 years earlier. The picture showed him and Thandiwe standing outside the tiny apartment they had rented after their wedding. Their clothes were simple. The walls behind them were cracked. Neither of them owned much, yet their smiles were radiant. Kondwani gently touched the frame. "I hope you're still that woman," he whispered. No one heard him. By 9 o'clock, Beatrice Soko arrived through a private entrance. She carried several sealed envelopes containing legal documents that transferred temporary operational authority to trusted executives while protecting the company from interference. Everything had been planned carefully. No shareholders would suffer. No employees would lose their jobs. No laws would be broken. The only deception was personal. Kondwani wanted to discover how people would respond if they believed he had nothing left. Lamek Kalalaba joined them shortly afterward. His normally confident expression looked troubled. "I still don't like this," he admitted. Kondwani smiled faintly. "Neither do I. There may be no way back." "I know. What if people surprise you in the worst possible way?" Kondwani looked out the window. "Then I'll stop living inside comforting assumptions." Before leaving, he removed his wedding ring. He stared at it for several seconds before placing it inside a small envelope addressed to Beatrice. "If anything happens to me," he said quietly, "return this to Thandiwe." Beatrice frowned. "Nothing is going to happen." "We don't know that." She carefully placed the envelope inside her briefcase. By noon, Kondwani had disappeared. Officially, he was traveling overseas to negotiate emergency financing after a series of disastrous international investments threatened his personal fortune. Only a handful of carefully selected people knew that explanation was incomplete. For nearly 3 weeks, Kondwani lived quietly in another part of Lusaka under a different appearance. He stopped shaving. He allowed dust to stain his worn clothes. His expensive haircut disappeared beneath untrimmed hair. He rode crowded minibuses instead of luxury vehicles. For the first time in decades, strangers looked through him instead of at him. The experience was unsettling. At restaurants, waiters greeted other customers first. Taxi drivers negotiated aggressively, assuming he had little money. Security guards who once saluted him barely acknowledged his presence. No one recognized one of the richest men in Zambia. Every evening, he wrote observations inside a small notebook. "Money changes how people see your face. Poverty makes honest people invisible. Kindness is easier to promise than to practice." Meanwhile, life inside the mansion continued almost normally. Thandiwe believed Kondwani was fighting desperately to save what remained of his business empire. At first, she called him every day. The calls went unanswered. She sent dozens of messages. Most received only brief replies. Meetings. "I'm safe. We'll explain later." Nothing more. The silence irritated her. One afternoon, she confronted Beatrice inside the company's headquarters. "You're his legal advisor," Thandiwe said firmly. "You know what's happening." Beatrice answered calmly. "I know only what Mr. Phiri has authorized me to share. My husband is in trouble. He is handling important matters." "Is the company bankrupt?" "I cannot discuss confidential information." Frustrated, Thandiwe left without another word. Outside the building, Moses was waiting beside his luxury SUV. "What did she tell you?" "Nothing." He wasn't surprised. "They're hiding something." Thandiwe folded her arms. "I don't understand why Kondwani won't simply tell me the truth." Moses looked toward the company headquarters. "Maybe because the truth is worse than we think." Those words lingered in her mind all afternoon. 3 days later, rumors began spreading through Lusaka's business community. An overseas investment connected to Kondwani's private assets had reportedly collapsed. Financial bloggers speculated endlessly. Radio commentators questioned whether the famous businessman had overextended himself. Social media exaggerated every rumor. Some claimed he had fled the country. Others insisted creditors were preparing lawsuits. None of the stories were accurate, but they traveled quickly. Within 48 hours, invitations to exclusive events quietly stopped arriving at the Phiri mansion. Business acquaintances who once called every week suddenly became unavailable. People who had proudly introduced themselves as Kondwani's close friends now answered messages hours later, or not at all. Thandiwe noticed. She tried convincing herself it was temporary. Still, an unfamiliar anxiety settled inside her chest. One evening, Chikondi visited for dinner. The atmosphere felt noticeably different. "Have you spoken to Kondwani?" she asked. "Only short messages." "What does he say?" "Almost nothing." Chikondi hesitated. "I heard another rumor today." Thandiwe looked up immediately. "What rumor?" "That he lost almost everything." Silence filled the dining room. Finally, Thandiwe forced a laugh. "People always invent stories." "I hope so." "So do I." But her voice lacked confidence. Later that night, unable to sleep, she wandered through the enormous mansion. Every room reminded her of the life they had built together. The grand staircase, the private library, the piano Kondwani rarely played anymore, the family photographs decorating the hallway. She stopped before the oldest picture. It showed the two of them standing outside their first apartment. For several moments, she simply stared. She remembered how little they had owned. She remembered believing that love could overcome anything. When had she stopped believing that this question unsettled her? Before she could answer it, her phone rang. It was Moses. "You need to prepare yourself," he said immediately. "For what?" "I've spoken with someone inside the banking sector. And the situation may be much worse than anyone expected." Her heartbeat quickened. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying—" Moses paused carefully. "If Kondwani really has lost everything you need to think about, protecting yourself, protecting myself, don't let his mistakes destroy your future." She sat silently. "I don't want to hear this." "You may have no choice." After ending the call, Thandiwe remained alone in the darkness for a long time. Fear had entered the mansion. Not fear for Kondwani's safety, fear of losing the life she had come to depend upon. Across the city, Kondwani quietly closed his notebook after reading reports about the spreading rumors. The first stage of his plan had worked exactly as expected. Now came the part he feared most. Returning home. Not as the billionaire everyone respected, but as a man the world believed had become nothing more than a penniless stranger. He took a slow breath, looked down at his worn sandals and faded jacket, and whispered to himself, "Tomorrow, I'll finally learn who truly sees me." The morning sky over Lusaka was bright and cloudless, but Kondwani Phiri felt a heaviness in his chest that no sunshine could lift. He stood across the street from the mansion he had called home for nearly 25 years. From a distance, everything looked exactly as it always had. The white stone walls gleamed beneath the African sun. The iron gates stood proudly beneath the family's name. Gardeners trimmed roses with quiet precision, while security guards chatted near the entrance. Nothing had changed, except him. His neatly tailored suits had been replaced by faded brown trousers that had been patched at both knees. His once polished shoes were now worn sandals coated with road dust. His beard had grown unevenly across his face, and the expensive watch that had accompanied him for years was gone. In his hand was the same weathered canvas bag. Inside were only a few clothes, a notebook, and the old Bible that had belonged to his mother. Kondwani inhaled slowly. He had negotiated billion-dollar contracts. He had spoken before presidents and international investors. Yet walking toward his own front gate required more courage than any business deal he had ever faced. He silently prayed that the woman waiting inside would recognize the man she had once promised to love. Not his wealth, not his reputation. Him. The guards noticed him before he reached the gate. One of them stepped forward. "Sir, this is private property." "I know." The guard looked him up and down. "Can I help you?" "I live here." The younger guard laughed. "I don't think so. My name is Kondwani Phiri." Both guards exchanged confused looks. The older one frowned. "This isn't funny." "I'm not joking." The younger guard folded his arms. "Mr. Phiri is overseas." "No," Kondwani answered calmly. "I'm home." The brief conversation attracted the attention of several housekeepers working near the entrance. One of them stared carefully. Her eyes widened slightly. She had worked in the mansion for more than 10 years. Although the beard-worn clothing and tired posture transformed his appearance, something in his voice sounded familiar. Before she could speak, the front door opened. Thandiwe stepped outside. She wore an elegant cream-colored dress and dark sunglasses, preparing to leave for a luncheon with several influential businesswomen. Her expression changed the moment she noticed the gathering. "What's happening?" The younger guard pointed toward Kondwani. "This man claims he lives here." She looked at the stranger. For several seconds she simply stared. The face seemed strangely familiar. Then recognition slowly appeared. Her sunglasses slipped slightly down her nose. "Kondwani." He smiled gently. "I'm home." She froze. Her eyes traveled from his untrimmed beard to his dusty sandals. His clothes looked cheap, wrinkled, worn. Nothing about him resembled the successful businessman she had married. "Kondwani." Her voice trembled. "What happened to you?" He took another step closer. "I'll explain everything." She instinctively stepped backward. "No. I've been trying to come home. You look—" She stopped herself. "I lost access to everything for now," he admitted softly. "The investments, they're gone." Silence. The words hung heavily in the warm afternoon air. One gardener quietly stopped working. The housekeepers exchanged nervous glances. Even the guards avoided looking directly at either of them. Thandiwe's breathing became shallow. "Gone. Yes. But the company, the businesses continue operating. But personally, I have almost nothing." She stared at him as though hearing a foreign language. "No. It's the truth. No. I wanted to tell you myself. You expect me to believe this?" He nodded slowly. "I hoped you'd believe me." She looked around. Across the street, several neighbors had begun gathering near their gates after noticing the unusual scene. Luxury neighborhoods were rarely quiet for long when drama appeared. Whispers spread quickly. "Is that Kondwani? What happened? Why is he dressed like that? I heard he lost everything." "Oh my goodness." Every whispered sentence tightened the knot inside Thandiwe's stomach. She wasn't thinking about Kondwani. She was thinking about everyone watching. "Kondwani," she whispered urgently, "please leave." His smile faded. "What? Not now." I came home. People are watching. I know. We'll talk somewhere else. This is our home. She glanced toward the growing crowd. No. He searched her face. I have nowhere else. She lowered her voice. You can't stand here looking like this. The sentence struck him harder than he expected, not because of the words, because of what they revealed. She wasn't asking whether he had eaten. She wasn't asking whether he had been hurt. She wasn't asking how he had survived. She was worried about appearances. Kondwani remained calm. I'm still your husband. Her jaw tightened. You were my husband. The words escaped before she fully realized she had spoken them. The crowd fell silent. Even birds seemed to disappear from the afternoon air. Kondwani looked at her quietly. I've only lost money, she answered without hesitation. You lost everything. He shook his head gently. No. I still have my name. She laughed bitterly. What name? The newspapers are already calling you a failure. I'm still the same man. No, you're not. I am. You've become. She searched for a word powerful enough to separate herself from him forever. Finally, it came. A beggar. Gasps spread through the watching neighbors. Kondwani closed his eyes briefly. He had imagined this possibility countless times. Hearing it spoken aloud still hurt more than he had prepared for. I am not a beggar, he replied quietly. I've simply fallen. She pointed toward the street. Then get back up somewhere else. Thandiwe, I will not spend the rest of my life taking care of a man who has nothing. Her words echoed across the entrance. Moses Banda suddenly arrived in his SUV after receiving a phone call from one of the neighbors. He stepped out quickly, immediately understanding the situation. Without greeting Kondwani, he walked directly beside his sister. You don't owe anyone an explanation, he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. Kondwani looked at him. Moses, you should leave. This is my house. Moses shook his head. It was. Kondwani turned back toward Thandiwe. Is this truly what you want? Her eyes filled briefly with uncertainty. For one fleeting moment, memories flashed through her mind. The tiny apartment, shared dreams, long nights encouraging each other through hardship, the promise she had made at their wedding. For a heartbeat, compassion almost returned. Then another whisper drifted from the watching crowd. Poor woman. Imagine becoming the wife of a bankrupt man. Embarrassment overwhelmed every softer emotion. She pointed toward the gate. Take your filthy bag. Her voice rose louder. And leave. Nobody moved. She repeated herself. Louder. I said leave. One security guard reluctantly picked up Kondwani's canvas bag and placed it outside the gate. The heavy iron gate slowly closed between husband and wife. The metallic sound echoed through the silent street like the ending of a lifetime. Kondwani stood motionless. He neither argued nor begged. He simply picked up the bag, brushed dust from its side, and looked one final time at the woman he still loved. I pray, he said softly, that one day you'll understand what was truly lost today. Without another word, he turned and began walking away. The neighbors continued watching. Some pitied him. Some quietly judged him. Most simply stared. No one followed. No one offered help. No one. Except an elderly widow standing several houses away. My Ruth Tembo had witnessed everything from her modest front yard. She watched the lonely figure disappear down the road with slow, exhausted steps. Then, without hesitation, she picked up a small basket containing fresh bread and bananas. Ignoring the whispers around her, she hurried after the man everyone else had just rejected. Because while the wealthy neighborhood had seen only a beggar, my Ruth saw a human being who looked like he hadn't been shown kindness in a very long time. Kondwani walked without looking back. The afternoon sun beat down on the pavement as the sounds of expensive cars and distant laughter faded behind him. His footsteps were slow, not because he was physically exhausted, but because every step carried the weight of a marriage that had just collapsed. He had imagined rejection. He had prepared himself for disappointment. But nothing could have prepared him for hearing the woman he loved call him a beggar before strangers. His heart ached, yet strangely there was no anger, only grief. He reached a quiet intersection nearly a kilometer from the mansion before stopping beneath the shade of a large acacia tree. For the first time since leaving the gate, he allowed himself to sit on a weathered wooden bench. His hands rested on the old canvas bag. His eyes remained fixed on the dusty road. He whispered a short prayer. "Father, if this pain has a purpose, help me endure it." A gentle voice interrupted his thoughts. "My son." Kondwani looked up. The elderly woman he had noticed earlier stood before him, slightly out of breath from hurrying after him. My Ruth Tembo smiled warmly. "I thought you might be hungry." She held out the small basket she carried. Inside were 2 pieces of homemade bread, several bananas, and a bottle of water. Kondwani immediately stood. "Mother, I can't take your food." She laughed softly. "And why not? You need it more than I do." She shook her head. "When God gives me enough for one meal, He has also given me enough to share." Her words reminded him painfully of his own mother. Without another argument, he accepted the basket. "Thank you." She nodded toward the bench. "Sit." The 2 strangers shared the simple meal together beneath the tree. For several minutes, neither spoke. The silence felt surprisingly comfortable. Finally, my Ruth smiled. "You've been crying." Kondwani quickly wiped his eyes. "I didn't realize. Men cry too." He laughed quietly. "I suppose they do." She tore another piece of bread in half. "I won't ask what happened." "Why not?" "Because whatever happened already hurt enough." He stared at her. "So instead..." She handed him the bread. "I'll simply remind you that no pain lasts forever." Kondwani accepted it silently. After they finished eating, she stood. "Come." "Where?" "Home." He looked confused. "I don't have one." "You do now." He hesitated. "I couldn't possibly impose." "You aren't imposing." "I have no money." "I didn't ask." "I may not be able to repay you." "I didn't ask for repayment either." He smiled for the first time that day. "You don't even know my name." She laughed. "I know enough." "What do you know?" "I know you're carrying more sadness than luggage." They began walking together through a modest neighborhood, several kilometers from the wealthy district. The streets were narrow but lively. Children played football with a homemade ball wrapped in tape. Women sold tomatoes, onions, and roasted maize beneath colorful umbrellas. Motorcycles buzzed between pedestrians. Music drifted from small shops. Unlike the polished silence surrounding the mansion, life here felt wonderfully imperfect. People greeted one another by name. Neighbors shared conversations across fences. Someone was always laughing. My Ruth's home stood at the end of a small dirt lane. It was a tiny brick house with a corrugated metal roof that had clearly survived many rainy seasons. A few flowering plants grew in recycled paint buckets near the doorway. The front porch held 2 old wooden chairs, polished smooth by years of use. "It's not much," she admitted. "It's beautiful," Kondwani answered honestly. Inside the house contained only 3 small rooms. Everything was clean. Everything had a place. Nothing was wasted. Framed photographs covered one wall. Kondwani noticed pictures of children and grandchildren. They live in Copperbelt Province now, my Ruth explained. They always ask me to move closer. Why don't you? She smiled gently. Because this neighborhood needs grandmothers too. Before he could answer, someone knocked on the door. A cheerful young woman entered carrying a basket of vegetables. Mama Ruth, I brought. She stopped after noticing Kondwani. Oh. My Ruth smiled. Naomi, this is our guest. Naomi Chilishe nodded politely. Welcome. She appeared to be in her early 30s, dressed in simple work clothes after spending the day selling vegetables at the nearby market. Without asking questions, she placed fresh tomatoes and spinach on the kitchen table. I had extra today. My Ruth laughed. You always have extra. Naomi shrugged. Someone always needs something. Kondwani watched quietly. No discussion of payment, no expectation of reward. Simply kindness. After Naomi left, another knock came. This time, it was Patrick Mwansa, a local mechanic with grease still covering his hands. Mama Ruth, your gate was loose again. He smiled. I fixed it. You should have let me pay you. He waved dismissively. Your family. Only after noticing Kondwani did he extend his hand. I'm Patrick. Kondwani. Nice to meet you. No suspicion, no judgment, no curiosity about why a stranger was staying there. Just welcome. As evening approached, the small neighborhood gradually filled with familiar routines. Smoke rose from cooking fires. Children returned home. Neighbors exchanged greetings before closing their gates. Kondwani sat quietly on the porch beside my Ruth. This place feels different, she smiled knowingly. From where? From the world I came from. She looked toward the street. People here don't have much. I've noticed. But they've learned something. What? When tomorrow isn't guaranteed. She folded her hands. Today becomes precious. He remained silent. She continued. If your neighbor is hungry today, you don't wait until you're rich to help. You share what you have. Exactly. A few minutes later, laughter echoed from nearby. Several children chased one another down the road. One little boy stumbled and scraped his knee. Before his mother could reach him, 3 other children had already helped him stand. None laughed. None walked away. They simply helped. Kondwani watched the scene carefully. So simple, he murmured. What is... They didn't stop to ask whether helping would benefit them. My Ruth smiled. Children usually understand love better than adults. Darkness settled over Lusaka. Later that night, Kondwani lay awake on a simple mattress in the small guest room. Rain began tapping gently against the metal roof. The room contained almost nothing. A bed, a chair, a small wooden table, yet somehow he felt more peaceful there than he had inside the enormous mansion during the previous year. Before sleeping, he opened his notebook. He wrote slowly beneath the light of a small lamp. Today I lost a house, but found a home. The richest meal I ate was bread shared by someone who had almost nothing. The first people to welcome me asked neither my profession nor my bank account. Perhaps wealth has hidden more from me than poverty ever could. He closed the notebook and switched off the lamp. Across the city, Thandiwe stood alone on the balcony of the mansion. The house felt unusually empty. She told herself she had made the practical decision, the necessary decision, the intelligent decision. Then why, she wondered, did silence suddenly feel so unbearably loud? Far away beneath the humble roof of my Ruth's little home, Kondwani finally drifted to sleep. For the first time since beginning his test, he realized something unexpected. The greatest lesson might not come from exposing betrayal. It might come from discovering the extraordinary kindness of people the world barely noticed. The next morning began long before sunrise. A rooster crowed somewhere beyond the neighboring houses, followed by the distant rumble of minibuses beginning their daily routes through Lusaka. The neighborhood slowly awakened, not with the quiet hum of expensive air conditioning units, but with the sounds of ordinary people preparing to earn an honest living. Kondwani opened his eyes to the aroma of fresh porridge. For a brief moment, he forgot where he was. Then the small room, the simple wooden ceiling and the soft rain-stained walls reminded him that he was no longer sleeping inside his mansion. He smiled faintly. Oddly enough, he had slept better than he had in months. When he stepped into the kitchen, Mai Ruth was already preparing breakfast. "Good morning," she said cheerfully. "You should have woken me. I could have helped." She laughed. "You'll have plenty of opportunities." As they ate together, Patrick knocked on the door. "I'm heading to the garage," he announced. Then he looked toward Kondwani. "If you're looking for something to do today, you're welcome to come." Kondwani hesitated. "I don't know much about repairing cars." Patrick grinned. "You don't have to. You can sweep the workshop or hand me tools." Kondwani nodded. "I'd appreciate that." Within minutes, they were walking through narrow streets lined with tiny businesses. Women arranged vegetables outside market stalls. Tailors unlocked their shops. Young men pushed handcarts loaded with sacks of maize. Everyone seemed busy. Everyone had somewhere to be. No one asked where Kondwani had come from. Patrick's workshop sat beside a busy roadside. It wasn't large, only 2 repair bays covered by a corrugated roof, a small office with peeling paint, and shelves filled with worn tools. 3 mechanics were already working. Patrick introduced everyone. "This is Benson." A broad-shouldered mechanic smiled warmly. "And that's Isaac." The younger man wiped grease from his hands before shaking Kondwani's hand. Finally, Patrick pointed toward a teenage apprentice. "That's Joseph." The boy couldn't have been older than 17. He smiled shyly. "Welcome." Kondwani noticed something immediately. Nobody mocked his worn clothes. Nobody questioned why a middle-aged stranger wanted to help in a small garage. They simply accepted him. Throughout the morning, Kondwani swept floors, organized tools, carried spare tires, and cleaned workbenches. The work was physically demanding. His back ached. His hands became dusty. Yet he found unexpected satisfaction in every task. Around noon, an elderly customer arrived driving an old pickup truck. After inspecting the vehicle, Patrick frowned. "The transmission needs more work than I expected." The old man sighed deeply. "How much?" Patrick quietly calculated the cost. The customer's shoulders slumped. "I can't afford that." Silence filled the workshop. Finally, Patrick smiled. "Pay for the parts." "And the labor?" "We'll manage." The old man's eyes widened. "I don't want charity." "It isn't charity." Patrick smiled. "It's neighbors helping neighbors." After the customer left, Kondwani asked quietly, "You'll lose money." Patrick shrugged. "Probably." "Then why do it?" "Because next month it might be my truck." The simple answer stayed with Kondwani all afternoon. Back at the mansion, life looked very different. Tandive sat inside the elegant dining room, staring at untouched coffee. The house felt strangely hollow. Normally, Kondwani's quiet presence filled even the silent moments. Now every room seemed larger, colder. A housekeeper entered carefully. "Madame." "Yes, a gentleman wishes to see you." Moments later, Moses walked inside carrying several newspapers. He placed them on the table. Across one business page appeared another headline, speculating about Kondwani's financial collapse. Although none of the reports contained confirmed facts, they were enough to fuel public curiosity. Moses spoke first. The rumors are getting worse. Thandiwe rubbed her temples. I've seen them. Investors are nervous. The companies are still operating. For now. She looked at him sharply. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting you protect yourself before everything disappears. She frowned. He is still my husband. Is he? What does that mean? He walked back here looking like a homeless man. He said he lost his assets. And you believed him? She hesitated. I don't know what to believe anymore. Moses leaned forward. You need to think clearly. I'm trying. If creditors come after him, they won't. You don't know that. He lowered his voice. The mansion, your accounts, your future. She interrupted him. Stop. I'm only trying to help. She looked away. Then help me understand how everything changed so quickly. Even Moses had no answer. Across town, Kondwani spent the afternoon helping Joseph organize spare engine parts. The teenager worked hard, but appeared unusually distracted. Finally, Kondwani asked, Something on your mind? Joseph smiled awkwardly. It's nothing. Patrick overheard the conversation. It's school. Joseph lowered his head. He may have to quit next term. Why school fees? The boy answered quietly. My mother can't afford them anymore. Kondwani felt something tighten inside his chest. What do you want to become? Joseph looked surprised. An engineer. You like machines. I love them. Patrick laughed. He repairs things faster than I do. Joseph smiled modestly. But dreams cost money. Those words reminded Kondwani of his own youth. He saw himself studying beneath a smoking kerosene lamp while wondering whether he would ever finish school. For several moments, he remained silent. That evening, after returning to Myroth's house, he excused himself briefly and walked to a quiet corner of the neighborhood. Using a secure phone hidden inside his travel bag, a phone known only to Beatrice and Lamech, he made a single encrypted call. Good evening, sir, Beatrice answered. How is everything? Stable. I need a favor. Anything. There is a young man named Joseph. Beatrice waited. Arrange anonymous payment for every year of his engineering education. No name attached. None. As always. And make sure his mother believes it came through a community scholarship. It will be done. After ending the call, Kondwani smiled softly. He had spent years donating millions through corporate foundations, yet somehow helping one determined teenager felt deeply personal. The following morning, news spread through the garage. Joseph rushed inside waving an envelope. I got it. Patrick looked confused. What happened? A scholarship. Everyone gathered around. It covers everything. Patrick laughed joyfully and hugged the stunned teenager. You see, I don't understand, Joseph whispered. I never even applied. Kondwani stood quietly in the corner, pretending to organize tools. His heart filled with quiet gratitude. No applause, no recognition, no cameras. Only one young man's future suddenly becoming possible. Later that afternoon, another surprise arrived. A luxury SUV pulled into the dusty street outside the workshop. Several mechanics stopped working. A sharply dressed businessman stepped out. Jackson Nkoma, one of Lusaka's wealthiest property developers. He had often attended social events with Thandiwe and Moses. Jackson glanced briefly toward the workshop before speaking to Patrick. I'm looking for someone. Patrick nodded politely. Who? A man named Kondwani. Silence. Patrick looked toward the stranger sweeping the workshop floor. Kondwani slowly turned. Shop floor. Kondwani slowly turned. Their eyes met. For just a fraction of a second, Jackson's expression suggested recognition. Then it disappeared. He smiled politely. "I'm sorry. I must have the wrong person." Without another word, he returned to his SUV and drove away. Patrick looked puzzled. "Do you know him?" Kondwani answered carefully. "I've seen him before." But deep inside, he understood something important. The circle surrounding his old life was beginning to close in. Someone had started looking for him, and sooner or later, the fragile wall separating Kondwani Phiri, the billionaire, from Kondwani, the beggar, would begin to crack. 3 weeks had passed since Kondwani had walked away from the mansion, carrying nothing but a weathered canvas bag. Life in Ruth's neighborhood had settled into a comforting rhythm. Every morning began with shared greetings across small fences. Shopkeepers swept the dust from their storefronts before opening for business. Children hurried toward school in neatly washed uniforms, some carrying backpacks that had clearly been passed down through older siblings. Every evening ended with neighbors sitting outside together, exchanging stories, while the day's heat slowly disappeared beneath the cool African sky. For the first time in many years, Kondwani wasn't surrounded by board meetings, financial forecasts, or endless phone calls. Instead, he was surrounded by people. Real people. People who celebrated tiny victories because life had taught them not to overlook them. One Saturday morning, Ruth handed him a woven basket. "We're going to the market," Kondwani smiled. "You're giving me work again." She laughed. "Everyone works." The community market buzzed with life. Women called out prices for fresh vegetables. Fishermen arranged their morning catch on crushed ice. Tailors displayed colorful fabrics beneath canvas shelters, while children darted through narrow walkways, carrying bread or bottled water for their parents. The market wasn't wealthy, but it was alive. As Ruth greeted one vendor after another, Kondwani noticed something remarkable. Nearly everyone knew her. "Mama Ruth." "Good morning. How are your grandchildren?" People stopped working simply to ask about her health. She wasn't rich. She wasn't famous. Yet she possessed something money could never purchase. She belonged. As they continued walking, a little girl of about 8 years old accidentally bumped into Kondwani while carrying a small basket of tomatoes. The basket slipped from her hands. Bright red tomatoes rolled across the dusty ground. "Oh no!" The child's face filled with panic. Before she could kneel, Kondwani was already gathering them. Several nearby vendors immediately joined him. Within seconds, every tomato had been collected. "No damage." One woman smiled. The little girl looked relieved. "Thank you." "What is your name?" Kondwani asked. "Linda." "Are these your family's vegetables?" She nodded. "My mother is over there." A woman hurried toward them. "I'm so sorry." "You don't need to apologize," Kondwani replied. "Children have accidents." The woman smiled gratefully. "Most people would have shouted." He shook his head. "Tomatoes are easier to replace than confidence." The mother laughed warmly. As they walked away, Ruth looked at him thoughtfully. "You've always spoken like someone who has carried both success and suffering." Kondwani smiled, but said nothing. Later that afternoon, they visited Grace Mbewe, the neighborhood's primary school teacher. The small school stood beside a dusty football field where dozens of children played during lunch break. The classrooms were modest, paint peeled from several walls. Some desks had been repaired multiple times, yet every room echoed with eager voices. Grace welcomed them with a bright smile. "Mama Ruth, you're just in time." She turned toward Kondwani. "You must be our mysterious guest." "I suppose I am." She extended her hand. "I'm Grace." Kondwani. After showing them around the school, Grace sighed quietly. "The children work incredibly hard." "They seem happy," Kondwani observed. They are. But happiness doesn't pay examination fees. She opened a small cabinet filled with student records. I have 12 brilliant students who may not continue next year. Why? Their families simply can't afford it. Kondwani carefully studied the names. Each represented another dream, hanging in uncertainty. Grace continued, "Sometimes I wonder how much talent this country loses simply because children are born into poverty." The words struck Kondwani deeply. He remembered standing in similar classrooms decades earlier. If one teacher hadn't believed in him, if one scholarship hadn't appeared at exactly the right moment, his entire life could have followed a completely different path. As they prepared to leave, one little boy ran toward Grace, carrying a handmade drawing. "Teacher." She smiled. "What have you made?" "It's our future hospital." The drawing showed a large building surrounded by smiling doctors. Grace knelt beside him. "You still want to become a doctor?" "Yes." "So no one has to travel far when they're sick." Grace hugged him. "I'm proud of you." Watching the exchange, Kondwani felt his heart tighten. Dreams were everywhere. Opportunity wasn't. That evening, after returning home, he quietly stepped outside with the secure phone hidden inside his travel bag. Beatrice answered almost immediately. "Good evening, sir. I need another favor." "I'm listening." "There is a school." He explained everything Grace had shared. When he finished, Beatrice remained silent for a moment. "How many students?" "Every child at risk of leaving. We can establish another scholarship fund." "No." "What do you mean? I don't want it connected to my company." "Anonymous again?" "Yes." "What name shall we use?" Kondwani looked toward the small homes surrounding him. Children laughed nearby while neighbors prepared dinner together. After a long pause, he smiled. "Call it the Tomorrow Fund." "I like that. It shouldn't honor one person. It should honor hope. It will be arranged." 2 weeks later, Grace received unexpected news. Every struggling student had received full educational sponsorship. No explanation, no publicity, only a simple letter stating that a private donor believed no child's future should end because of poverty. The entire school celebrated. Teachers cried openly. Parents embraced one another. Children who had spent weeks fearing they would leave school returned to class with renewed excitement. Grace stood alone in her classroom that evening holding the letter. She whispered quietly, "Whoever you are, thank you." Meanwhile, Kondwani continued living exactly as before. He swept Patrick's workshop. He helped Naomi unload vegetables. He repaired broken chairs for elderly neighbors. No one suspected that the quiet man in worn clothes was secretly changing lives across Lusaka. Across the city, however, life inside the Phiri mansion continued unraveling. Thandiwe sat alone, reviewing invitations that had once arrived almost daily. Most had stopped. Several businesswomen who previously insisted on hosting lavish lunches suddenly claimed they were too busy. Even Chikondi visited less frequently. The silence frightened her. One afternoon, she decided to visit a fashionable boutique where she had shopped for years. The owner greeted her politely, but not warmly. As she browsed, she overheard two customers whispering nearby. "Isn't that Kondwani Phiri's wife? I heard they're ruined. What a shame. I suppose money never lasts forever." Thandiwe pretended not to hear. Yet every word pierced her pride. For the first time, she realized how quickly admiration disappeared when people believed wealth had vanished. She left the boutique without buying anything. That evening, Moses arrived again. "You need to stop worrying about public's opinion." "I'm not." He raised an eyebrow. "Then why do you look miserable?" She answered honestly. I don't know who my real friends are anymore." Moses laughed dryly. "Now you do." His answer offered no comfort. Far away, beneath the simple roof of my Ruth's home, neighbors gathered for dinner after learning about the anonymous scholarships. Everyone speculated about the mysterious donor. Patrick smiled. "Whoever they are, they understand what matters." Grace nodded. "They're investing in people instead of headlines." My Ruth quietly looked toward Kondwani. He simply smiled and continued eating. She said nothing. But somewhere deep inside, the elderly widow had begun to suspect that the quiet stranger living under her roof carried secrets far greater than anyone could imagine. Nearly 2 months had passed since Kondwani had left the Phiri mansion. Lusaka had quietly moved on. New business headlines replaced the old rumors. Fresh scandals occupied social media. People who had once spent hours discussing Kondwani's supposed financial collapse now rarely mentioned his name. But while the city forgot, Thandiwe could not. The mansion had never felt so empty. Its grand rooms echoed with silence. The dining table, built for 12, was occupied by only one person most evenings. The piano Kondwani used to play on quiet Sunday afternoons remained closed, collecting a thin layer of dust. The luxury surrounding her no longer felt comforting. It felt lonely. One Monday morning, she opened her wardrobe to prepare for a charity luncheon hosted by several prominent businesswomen. Rows of elegant dresses filled the closet. Designer handbags rested neatly on polished shelves. Diamond necklaces sparkled beneath soft lighting. Months earlier, choosing an outfit had been exciting. Now it felt strangely meaningless. She eventually selected a navy blue dress and left for the event. When she arrived at the exclusive country club, something immediately felt different. Usually, several women would greet her enthusiastically near the entrance. Today, only the receptionist smiled politely. Inside the banquet hall, conversations continued without interruption as she walked toward familiar faces. "Good afternoon," she said warmly. The women smiled, but the smiles ended almost as quickly as they began. "Hello, Thandiwe. You look well. Please excuse us. We were just discussing something." The conversation resumed. Without her. She stood awkwardly for several seconds before quietly taking an empty seat nearby. No one intentionally insulted her. No one openly rejected her. Yet she suddenly realized she had become invisible. Throughout lunch, discussions revolved around new investments, international conferences, and luxury developments. Months ago, everyone had eagerly asked for her opinion. Today, hardly anyone looked in her direction. After the event ended, she overheard 2 women speaking just outside the ballroom. She must be struggling. "I heard her husband lost everything. What a pity." Well, that's life. Neither woman realized Thandiwe was standing only a few steps away. She walked quickly to her car before tears could appear. For the first time in years, she drove through Lusaka without any destination. She eventually found herself near the old neighborhood where she and Kondwani had rented their first apartment after getting married. Almost without thinking, she parked. The building looked much smaller than she remembered. Children played football in the courtyard. Laundry hung from balconies. A woman watered flowers growing inside old plastic containers. Everything looked ordinary. Yet memories flooded back. She remembered carrying groceries up the narrow staircase because they couldn't afford a car. She remembered laughing with Kondwani when rain leaked through the roof onto their tiny dining table. She remembered nights when they shared one simple meal and still believed they were the richest couple in the world. Back then, neither of them cared about luxury. When had that changed? She sat inside the parked car for nearly 30 minutes before quietly driving away. Across the city, Kondwani spent another morning helping Patrick repair engines. Business at the garage had increased steadily, not because of advertising, because people trusted Patrick. Customers often said the same thing. He always tells the truth. Watching Patrick work reminded Kondwani of an important lesson. Reputation wasn't built through grand speeches. It was built through thousands of honest decisions. During lunch, Patrick sat beside him beneath a shade tree. "Oh, you've changed." Kondwani looked surprised. "Have I?" Patrick nodded. "When you first arrived, you carried sadness. And now, you still carry sadness." He smiled gently. "But now you also carry peace." Kondwani laughed softly. "I hadn't noticed. You smile more." For a moment, neither spoke. Finally, Patrick asked, "Do you ever think about going back?" Kondwani stared toward the busy road. "Every day." "So what's stopping you?" "The truth isn't finished yet." Patrick frowned slightly. "I don't understand." "You don't need to." Patrick accepted the answer without pressing further. That simple respect meant more than endless questions. Later that afternoon, Beatrice called using the secure phone. "I have an update." "I'm listening." "Our investigation is progressing." "What have you found?" "Several senior executives attempted to redirect company contracts to businesses secretly owned by their relatives." Kondwani wasn't surprised. "And Lamech. He documented everything." "What about the board?" "Some remained loyal." "And the others?" "They believed the rumors." Beatrice hesitated. "There's something else." "What?" "Moses Banda." Kondwani became silent. "He has been meeting privately with Jackson and Koma." "How often?" "Several times." "What are they discussing?" "We don't know yet." Kondwani looked toward the sky. He had suspected Moses would eventually reveal his true character. Still, hearing confirmation saddened him. "Continue gathering evidence," he said quietly. "We will." After ending the call, he remained seated for a long time. Patrick noticed. "Bad news. Disappointing news." "They aren't always the same." Kondwani smiled. "You're wiser than you pretend." Patrick laughed. "My grandmother raised me." Meanwhile, Moses sat inside an expensive restaurant with Jackson and Koma. The two men occupied a private corner table. Jackson stirred his coffee thoughtfully. "So? Any news?" Moses leaned forward. "Nothing definite. But I believe Kondwani truly lost everything." Jackson remained unconvinced. He disappeared too quietly. "What are you suggesting?" "I've done business with him for 15 years. And he never panics." "He isn't panicking." "Exactly." Moses frowned. "You think he's hiding something." "I think Kondwani Phiri is many things." Jackson set down his cup. "But foolish isn't one of them." The conversation shifted toward business opportunities. Neither man realized a waiter standing nearby had quietly overheard enough to sense that something important was unfolding. Back at the mansion, another unexpected disappointment awaited Thandiwe. She received a phone call from Chikondi. "I'm sorry." "For what?" "I won't be able to attend your fundraising dinner." "You promised weeks ago." "I know." "Is something wrong?" A brief silence followed. Finally, Chikondi answered carefully. "Some guests aren't comfortable attending this year." "What do you mean?" "They're worried about publicity." Thandiwe closed her eyes. "I understand." "No." "You don't have to explain." After ending the call, she slowly placed the phone on the table. One cancellation became 3. 3 became 7. By evening, nearly half the invited guests had withdrawn, not because they suddenly disliked charity, because association with a family rumored to be bankrupt no longer benefited their social standing. For the first time, Thandiwe understood what Kondwani had quietly endured during the early years of building his business. People loved success. Very few loved people. That night, she wandered through the mansion once again. She stopped outside Kondwani's old study. The door had remained closed since the day he left. After several moments, she opened it. Everything remained exactly as he had left it. Books lined the shelves. Family photographs stood on the desk. His reading glasses rested beside an unfinished notebook. Curious, she opened it. Most pages contained business ideas, leadership notes, charitable projects. Then she reached a page written only months before he disappeared. In neat handwriting, one sentence stood alone. The greatest fear is not losing money. It is discovering that the people you love only loved what money could provide. Thandiwe's hands trembled. She read the sentence again and again. A painful realization slowly settled over her. Long before he had walked away, long before the disguise, long before the rumors, Kondwani had already been quietly questioning her love. For the first time since throwing him out of the mansion, genuine regret entered her heart. But she still had no idea where he was. And with every passing day, finding him was becoming more difficult. The first cool breeze of early morning swept across Lusaka as employees streamed through the gates of Phiri Holdings headquarters. From the outside, everything appeared stable. Delivery trucks continued arriving on schedule. Receptionists welcomed visitors with practiced smiles. Managers hurried between departments, carrying reports and contracts. To the public, the company remained remarkably calm, despite months of rumors surrounding its founder. Behind closed doors, however, another story was unfolding. Inside the executive conference room, several senior managers gathered around a polished mahogany table. At the head sat Acting Operations Director Lamek Kalaba. He looked around the room before speaking. Our logistics division exceeded its monthly targets. Several managers nodded. However, he continued, I've received reports that 3 regional contracts were transferred to outside companies without proper board approval. Silence. One executive adjusted his tie. There were exceptional circumstances. Lamek looked directly at him. What circumstances? The company needed flexibility. According to whose authorization? No answer came. Lamek slowly opened a folder. I've reviewed every document. His voice remained calm. No emergency authority was granted. Another executive finally spoke. Mr. Kalaba, we're simply protecting the business. By redirecting contracts to companies owned by your relatives. The room became perfectly still. Several faces lost their color. Lamek closed the folder. I suggest everyone review our ethical responsibilities before the next meeting. Without another word, he stood and left. The executives exchanged nervous glances. One of them, Frederick Mulenga, waited until the door closed before whispering, He knows too much. Another man shook his head. It doesn't matter. Why, Kondwani is finished. And if he returns? Frederick laughed quietly. He won't. None of them noticed the small security camera mounted near the ceiling. Every meeting had been recorded. Every conversation carefully preserved. Miles away, Kondwani stood beside Patrick, repairing an aging delivery truck. Oil covered his hands. Sweat soaked through his faded shirt. He looked nothing like the billionaire whose executives were secretly plotting against him. Patrick slid beneath the truck. Pass me the wrench. Kondwani handed it over. You know, Patrick said while tightening a bolt, you're getting good at this. Kondwani smiled. I've had an excellent teacher. Patrick laughed. Don't quit your day job. The sentence made them both chuckle. If only Patrick knew. A customer approached carrying a cardboard box. He looked frustrated. My truck keeps breaking down. Patrick inspected the engine. The repair isn't difficult. How much? Patrick quoted a fair price. The customer sighed with relief. I expected much worse. Patrick shrugged. Charging more doesn't make the work better. After the customer walked away, Kondwani asked, You could have doubled the price. I could. Why didn't you? Patrick looked genuinely confused. Oh. Because that's not what it costs. The simplicity of the answer stayed with Kondwani. Honesty. Not strategy. Not branding. Just honesty. That afternoon he visited Grace Mbewe's school after classes had ended. Children filled the dusty football field while teachers organized papers inside the classrooms. Grace greeted him warmly. The scholarship changed everything. I'm happy to hear that. She smiled. You should have seen the parents. I imagine they were relieved. Some cried. She paused thoughtfully. I've been teaching for 18 years. And I've learned something. What is it? The children with the biggest dreams often come from the smallest homes. They watched several students practicing mathematics beneath a tree because the classrooms had become too warm. One little girl carefully shared her notebook with another whose family couldn't afford one. Neither complained. Neither hesitated. Grace smiled. They've already learned generosity. Kondwani quietly replied, I wish more adults remembered it. Across town, Moses met Jackson and Koma once again. This time their conversation was far more direct. Jackson placed several business files on the table. If Kondwani truly has no money, Moses leaned forward. Then, we should move quickly. What exactly are you proposing? Several suppliers are looking for new investors. And, if we acquire them now, he smiled, he will control contracts his company once dominated. Moses nodded slowly. You think Phiri Holdings will collapse? I think opportunity rarely waits. Neither man realized that another person had entered the restaurant. Beatrice Soko. She had arranged the meeting intentionally, not to confront them, to observe. Sitting quietly several tables away, she listened just long enough to confirm their intentions before leaving unnoticed. That evening, she contacted Kondwani. Yes, they've started. What happened? Moses and Jackson are positioning themselves to profit from your supposed downfall. Kondwani remained silent. They believe you're finished. I expected as much. They're moving aggressively. Continue documenting everything. You still don't want to intervene. Not yet. Beatrice hesitated. Sir? Yes. I know this began as a personal test. It did. But it's becoming much bigger. Kondwani looked toward the sunset. I know. Are you prepared for that? No. His honesty surprised even himself. Back at the mansion, Thandiwe sat alone in the enormous living room. She had begun noticing details she once ignored, the silence between the walls, the echo of footsteps, the empty chair where Kondwani usually read before dinner. She remembered how often he had invited her to accompany him on visits to rural schools, hospitals, and farming communities. Almost every time she had declined. I'm too busy. Another day. You can represent both of us. Now those excuses sounded painfully hollow. A knock interrupted her thoughts. One of the housekeepers entered. Madame. Yes. A package arrived. Inside was a small cardboard box with no return address. Curious, she opened it. There was no jewelry, no expensive gift, only a faded photograph. It showed her and Kondwani standing beside their very first pickup truck shortly after starting his transport business. On the back, written in Kondwani's familiar handwriting, were simple words. We smiled more when we owned less. No signature, no explanation. Only the sentence. She stared at it for several minutes before quietly placing it against her chest. Tears finally escaped. not dramatic sobs, just quiet tears that no one else witnessed. Meanwhile, Kondwani walked home beneath a sky filled with brilliant stars. My Ruth waited on the porch. "You look tired." "I've been thinking." "That can be exhausting." He smiled. She poured him a cup of hot tea. After several minutes, she asked softly, "Do you miss your family?" He looked into the steaming cup. "Every day." "Then why don't you go home?" He answered honestly. "Because I'm not sure my home still exists." My Ruth reached across the table and gently placed her hand over his. "My son." He looked up. "Sometimes." She smiled kindly. "A house disappears long before people move out." Her words lingered deep inside him. That night before sleeping, Kondwani opened his notebook once more. He wrote carefully, "Power reveals ambition. Poverty reveals compassion. Success attracted many people. Failure revealed almost none." He closed the notebook and extinguished the lamp. Unknown to him, Lamech and Beatrice had already gathered enough evidence to expose months of corruption inside Phiri Holdings. The truth was nearly complete. The test was approaching its final stage. And very soon, everyone who had mistaken humility for weakness would discover exactly who Kondwani Phiri had always been. A light rain fell over Lusaka the following Saturday morning, washing dust from the streets and leaving the city wrapped in a quiet calm. In My Ruth's neighborhood, children laughed as they splashed through shallow puddles, while shopkeepers covered their market stalls with plastic sheets. Inside the little brick house, Kondwani helped My Ruth patch a small leak in the kitchen roof. "You've become quite useful around here," she teased. He chuckled. "I've learned that billionaires are not the only people who can hold a hammer." She looked at him with an amused smile. "There's that mysterious sense of humor again." Kondwani only smiled. He had grown comfortable in this small community. Every day reminded him that dignity had little to do with bank accounts and everything to do with how people treated one another. As they finished repairing the roof, Grace Mbewe hurried toward the house carrying an umbrella. "Mama Ruth." The elderly widow stepped outside. "Grace, you'll get soaked." "I came because I need your help." "What happened?" Grace sighed. "The community center is organizing a food drive for elderly residents this afternoon." "That's wonderful." "It is." She hesitated. "But several volunteers canceled at the last minute." My Ruth immediately answered, "We'll help." Grace smiled with relief. "I knew you'd say that." By early afternoon, dozens of volunteers gathered inside the modest community hall. Long wooden tables were covered with bags of mealy meal, cooking oil beans, rice soap, and blankets donated by local businesses and residents. Everyone worked cheerfully despite the rain outside. Kondwani quietly carried heavy boxes from one side of the hall to the other. Nobody treated him differently. To them, he was simply another volunteer. Across town, Thandiwe sat inside her mansion, staring at the invitation Grace had mailed to several local donors weeks earlier. Normally, she would have ignored such an event. Community projects without photographers or influential guests had never interested her. But lately, something inside her had changed. Without fully understanding why, she picked up her car keys. An hour later, she arrived at the community center. There were no television cameras, no luxury vehicles, no elegant ballroom. Only ordinary people working together. She hesitated near the entrance before quietly walking inside. Grace immediately recognized her. "Mrs. Phiri." Thandiwe offered an awkward smile. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all. We always welcome extra hands." For the first time in years, Thandiwe rolled up the sleeves of her expensive blouse and began packing food parcels beside strangers. No one seemed impressed by her surname. No one asked about her mansion. Everyone simply worked. The experience felt strangely refreshing. Several hours passed. As volunteers loaded the final food packages onto delivery trucks, Grace invited everyone to rest before distributing supplies. People gathered around large pots of tea and homemade bread. Thandiwe quietly stood near one corner of the room. Then she noticed something. Across the hall, an elderly volunteer laughed warmly while speaking to a familiar-looking man with an untrimmed beard and worn clothing. The man stood with his back partially turned. For one brief second, her heart skipped. Something about his posture, the way he tilted his head while listening, the calmness in his movements. It reminded her painfully of Kondwani. Before she could look more closely, several children ran between them, carrying empty boxes. When they passed, the man was gone. She looked around the crowded hall. Nothing. Only volunteers continuing their work. She shook her head. "I'm imagining things," she whispered. Meanwhile, Kondwani had quietly stepped outside through the rear entrance after noticing Thandiwe moments earlier. His heart had nearly stopped. He had never expected to see her there, not in a place like this. He stood beneath the shelter behind the building, taking slow breaths. Ruth joined him a few minutes later. "You disappeared." He nodded toward the hall. "My wife is inside." Ruth looked surprised. "So that's her." "You knew." "I guessed." They remained silent. Finally, Ruth spoke softly. "She came here to help." I saw. "Perhaps people can change." Kondwani looked through the rain toward the community hall. "I hope so." "But hope and proof are different things." Ruth nodded. "That's true." Inside the hall, Grace approached Thandiwe, carrying 2 cups of tea. "You worked hard today." "I didn't do very much." "You did more than many people with far greater resources." They sat together near a window overlooking the rainy street. After a few quiet moments, Grace smiled. "You know." "What?" "I've been thinking a lot about someone recently." "Who?" "A gentleman." Thandiwe forced a polite smile. Grace continued. "He arrived in our neighborhood with almost nothing." Thandiwe listened carefully. He never complained. He never asked anyone for money. He simply worked. Something stirred inside her. "What was his name?" Grace hesitated. "I'm not sure I should say." "Why?" "Because I don't think he'd like people discussing his life." "I'm only curious." Grace smiled gently. "What impressed me wasn't his story." "What then?" "His character." She looked toward the volunteers cleaning tables. "He helps everyone. He repairs broken chairs. He tutors children. He carries groceries for elderly neighbors. He never expects recognition." Thandiwe quietly wrapped both hands around her tea. "He sounds like a remarkable man." Grace nodded. "He reminds me that poverty doesn't diminish dignity." The words pierced her heart. Grace continued. "Some people become generous after becoming rich." She smiled. "But the truly extraordinary ones remain generous after losing everything." Silence followed. For reasons she couldn't explain, Thandiwe suddenly found it difficult to breathe. She remembered the afternoon at the mansion. She remembered Kondwani standing outside the gate, asking only to come home. She remembered refusing to ask whether he had eaten, whether he was injured, whether he needed help. Instead, she had worried about neighbors, about gossip, about appearances. A painful knot tightened inside her chest. "Grace, yes. Do you believe people deserve second chances?" Grace answered without hesitation. I believe everyone deserves the opportunity to earn one. The answer lingered. Later that afternoon, volunteers began delivering food packages throughout the neighborhood. Grace invited Thandiwe to accompany one of the teams. As they walked through narrow streets, she noticed something unexpected. People smiled despite their hardships. Children waved enthusiastically. Neighbors greeted one another by name. Nobody seemed embarrassed by living simply. The warmth reminded her painfully of the early years of her marriage. When she returned to her car at sunset, she noticed a familiar elderly woman locking the gate of a tiny brick house nearby. It was my Ruth. Grace introduced them. Mama Ruth has practically become everyone's grandmother. Thandiwe smiled politely. It's nice to meet you. My Ruth studied her face carefully. For just a moment, neither woman spoke. Then my Ruth extended her hand warmly. The pleasure is mine. There was kindness in her eyes, no accusation, no bitterness, only compassion. As Thandiwe drove away, my Ruth remained standing quietly outside her home. Kondwani stepped onto the porch moments later. Did she leave? Yes. What did you think? My Ruth smiled sadly. I think... She looked toward the road where the car had disappeared. She finally met the kind of people she stopped noticing long ago. That night, Thandiwe couldn't sleep. Grace's words echoed endlessly in her mind. The truly extraordinary ones remain generous after losing everything. For the first time since Kondwani walked away from the mansion, she began wondering whether the poorest person in their marriage had never been her husband at all. The Monday morning sun rose over Lusaka with unusual brilliance, but inside the executive offices of Phiri Holdings, the atmosphere was heavy with anticipation. For nearly 3 months, Beatrice Soko and Lamek Kalaba had worked quietly behind the scenes, documenting every questionable decision made during Kondwani's disappearance. Every unauthorized contract, every secret meeting, every falsified approval, every betrayal. Nothing had been rushed, nothing had been assumed. Every accusation was supported by evidence. Beatrice closed the final file and looked across the conference table at Lamek. I think we're ready. Lamek nodded slowly. I never imagined so many people would reveal themselves this quickly. Neither did I. He sighed deeply. The saddest part isn't the corruption. What is, most of them believed Kondwani would never return. Beatrice carefully placed each folder into a secure briefcase. They forgot the man who built this company survived far worse than financial rumors. Meanwhile, several floors below the executives responsible for much of the misconduct were celebrating. Frederick Malenga leaned comfortably against the coffee machine. I told you nothing would happen. Another executive smiled confidently. The board hasn't questioned us in weeks. The old man is finished. Someone laughed. If he's even alive. None of them noticed the security officer quietly walking past the hallway carrying another sealed envelope addressed directly to Beatrice. Every careless conversation became another piece of evidence. Across town, Kondwani sat outside my Ruth's house, repairing an old wooden bench with Patrick. Children chased one another through the dusty lane, while Naomi arranged fresh vegetables outside her small stall. Life continued peacefully. Patrick tightened the final screw. There. He stepped back proudly. Almost good as new. Kondwani smiled. You never throw anything away. Patrick shrugged. If something still has life left. He gently brushed sawdust from the bench. Why replace it? The sentence lingered in Kondwani's mind. Perhaps people deserved the same chance. Not immediate forgiveness, but the opportunity to become useful again. As they carried the repaired bench onto the porch, Grace approached carrying several letters. Good news. She handed one envelope to my Ruth. The community center received another anonymous donation. My Ruth laughed. Our mysterious friend again. Grace smiled. Apparently. She opened the letter. Inside was funding for a medical outreach program serving elderly residents throughout the district. No donor's name, no publicity, only one handwritten sentence. Kindness grows best when nobody expects applause. Grace looked around thoughtfully. I wish I could thank whoever keeps doing this. Kondwani quietly focused on sanding the bench. My Ruth noticed. She smiled without saying a word. She no longer needed confirmation. She already knew. That evening, Beatrice arrived quietly at My Ruth's house after dark. Patrick and Naomi had already gone home. Only My Ruth remained awake, knitting beside a small lamp. She welcomed Beatrice inside before quietly excusing herself to prepare tea. Kondwani waited until they were alone. How bad is it? Beatrice opened the briefcase. Worse than we expected. She spread dozens of documents across the small wooden table. There were honest people. I know. Lamech protected every department he could. And the others? She pointed to separate files. Frederick authorized illegal contract transfers. 2 executives accepted undisclosed payments. 1 regional director secretly redirected company vehicles to a business owned by his cousin. Kondwani remained silent. What about Moses? Beatrice hesitated. He never entered the company. But he repeatedly encouraged investors to abandon Phiri Holdings. And Jackson, they've been planning acquisitions together. Kondwani slowly closed his eyes. Not because the information surprised him, because hearing it confirmed broke something inside him. These were people who had celebrated birthdays in his home, people he had trusted, people who had shaken his hand while secretly waiting for his downfall. After several moments, he spoke quietly. Any good news? Beatrice smiled. There is. She handed him another folder. Inside were letters from employees, security guards, drivers, warehouse workers, receptionists, mechanics. Many believed Kondwani had truly lost everything, yet they continued protecting the company anyway. One driver wrote, Mr. Phiri gave me my first honest job 22 years ago. Whether he is rich or poor changes nothing. This company gave my children an education. I will protect it until my final day. Another letter came from a receptionist. People keep asking if they should move their business elsewhere. I tell them the company's values didn't disappear simply because rumors appeared. Kondwani quietly folded the letters. His eyes became moist. I almost forgot. What? There are still people like this. Beatrice smiled gently. There always were. The following morning, Thandiwe sat alone in the mansion's breakfast room. Her appetite had disappeared. The elegant meals prepared each morning remained almost untouched. A housekeeper entered carefully. Madam, yes, someone delivered this. It was a small package wrapped in plain brown paper. No sender. Inside lay another photograph. This one showed Kondwani years earlier, kneeling beside several children during the opening of a rural school. She remembered that day. She had chosen not to attend. Instead, she had traveled to Johannesburg for a luxury shopping weekend with friends. She turned the photograph over. Another handwritten sentence appeared. The happiest days of my life were never the most expensive ones. Again, no signature. But she recognized the handwriting immediately. Her hands trembled. Who was sending these? Why now? Most importantly, why had she never truly noticed the man she married? Later that afternoon, she drove aimlessly through Lusaka once more. Without planning to, she found herself returning to the same neighborhood where Grace and My Ruth lived. She parked several streets away and simply walked. Children greeted her politely. Women smiled while sweeping their front yards. Someone offered her roasted maize. Nobody recognized her. For the first time in years, she experienced life without anyone treating her differently because of wealth. The feeling was strangely freeing. As she passed the community center, she noticed a newly installed sign. Tomorrow, Fund Learning Library. The small reading room had been created using anonymous donations. Inside, dozens of children sat reading quietly. Grace noticed her. "Mrs. Phiri." "Hello." Grace smiled warmly. "You came back." "I wanted to see the library. It's changing lives already." They walked between bookshelves together. Children barely looked up. They were too busy reading. Grace spoke softly. "The donor refused every request for recognition." "Do you know who it is?" "No. But whoever they are," she looked around proudly, "they understand that changing one child's future changes an entire generation." Those words stayed with Thandiwe long after she left. That evening, as sunset painted the Lusaka skyline in shades of gold and orange, Kondwani stood outside Mai Ruth's home, watching neighborhood children play football. Mai Ruth joined him. "You're thinking again." "I am." "About tomorrow?" He nodded. "The investigation is finished." "So, the truth comes next?" "Yes." She looked at him carefully. "Are you afraid?" Kondwani smiled sadly. "Very." "Of what?" He watched the children laughing together. "I'm afraid that exposing everyone else's failures," he paused, "will force me to face my own." "What failure?" "I spent years building an empire." His voice grew quieter. "But somewhere along the way," he looked toward the fading sunlight, "I stopped noticing that the person I loved was slowly changing." Mai Ruth gently touched his shoulder. "You noticed?" "Too late." She smiled kindly. "No. When love still hopes." She looked directly into his eyes. "It is never too late to seek the truth." Kondwani nodded slowly. Tomorrow would begin the final chapter. The evidence was complete. The masks would soon fall, and every choice made during the past 3 months would finally receive its answer. The announcement arrived on a quiet Tuesday morning. Every member of the Phiri Holdings Board received the same formal email. Mandatory executive board meeting. Attendance required. 10 Azrat a.m. No explanation accompanied the invitation. No agenda, no indication of who had called the meeting. Inside the executive offices, whispers spread almost immediately. Frederick Mulenga frowned as he reread the message. "Did you know about this?" One of the finance directors shook his head. "No." "Perhaps the auditors." Another executive shrugged. "Whatever it is, we'll deal with it." Their confidence sounded less convincing than before. Meanwhile, Lamek Kalaba calmly walked through the headquarters, greeting employees as he always had. Warehouse supervisors smiled at him. Receptionists wished him a pleasant morning. Drivers prepared delivery schedules. Everything appeared normal. Only Beatrice knew that by the end of the day, the company would never be the same again. Across town, Kondwani folded his worn blanket inside Mai Ruth's small guest room. His clothes were still faded. His beard remained untrimmed. Nothing about his appearance suggested extraordinary wealth. Mai Ruth watched quietly from the doorway. "So," he smiled. "So?" "The day has finally come." "It has." She stepped inside carrying a neatly wrapped package. "I have something for you." He looked surprised. "You didn't need to." "I know." He carefully opened the package. Inside was the clean blue shirt Patrick had worn during church celebrations, freshly washed and neatly pressed. "It's not expensive," Mai Ruth said softly, "but it's respectable." Kondwani gently touched the fabric. "It's beautiful." She smiled. I've learned something about you. What? You've never cared what clothes cost. You've cared whether they carried dignity. His eyes filled with gratitude. I'll treasure this. You'd better. She laughed. I'll expect it back. They both smiled. For a brief moment, neither thought about billionaires, companies, or betrayal. They were simply friends saying goodbye before an important journey. At the garage, Patrick wiped grease from his hands as Kondwani approached. I heard you're leaving today. For a little while. Patrick nodded. I figured. You figured? You arrived carrying secrets. He smiled warmly. I always knew one day they'd catch up with you. Kondwani laughed. I suppose they have. Patrick extended his hand. Whatever happens. He paused. Remember this place. I will. You never looked down on any of us. I couldn't. Why not? Because I learned more here than I ever taught. Patrick pulled him into a firm embrace. No matter where life takes you. He stepped back. Don't become too important to visit. I promise. Grace Mbewe also came to say goodbye before school began. The children had made something for him. One little girl shyly handed him a folded card decorated with crayons. Inside, dozens of children had written short messages. Thank you for helping carry our books. Thank you for fixing our football goal. Come back soon. God bless you. Not one child mentioned money, because none of them knew. They simply remembered kindness. Kondwani carefully folded the card and placed it inside his notebook. This may be the greatest gift I've ever received. Grace smiled. They'll miss you. I'll miss them too. She looked at him thoughtfully. I still don't know your whole story. You may soon. I suspected as much. Then she asked quietly, Will your story have a happy ending? Kondwani looked toward the schoolyard where children were beginning to arrive. I honestly don't know. At exactly 10 o'clock, the board meeting began. Every executive occupied the usual seat. Frederick leaned back confidently. Jackson and Koma attended as a prospective investment partner invited by several executives hoping to strengthen future business relationships. Moses Banda sat near the end of the table as a special guest. Conversations filled the room. Then, the doors opened. Lamech entered first. Behind him walked Beatrice carrying several thick binders. Without saying a word, she placed one binder in front of every executive. Frederick frowned. What is this? Beatrice answered calmly. Evidence. The room became silent. Lamech spoke. Before today's meeting continues, he looked around the table. Every person present should review the documents before them. Pages turned. Expressions changed. Inside every binder were copies of contracts, bank transfers, meeting records, security footage summaries, internal emails, signed approvals, every questionable decision made during the previous 3 months. Nobody spoke. Frederick's hands began trembling. This, he swallowed. This can't be complete. It is, Beatrice replied. Another executive looked pale. Where did you get all this? Lamech answered. From your own actions. At the mansion, Thandiwe sat quietly in Kondwani's old study. She had begun spending time there almost every day. It somehow made her feel closer to him. She picked up another notebook from the bookshelf. Inside were handwritten reflections rather than business plans. She slowly turned the pages. One entry caught her attention. Never measure a person's heart during celebration. Measure it during disappointment. Another read, Success attracts applause. Failure introduces honesty. Finally, she reached a page that made her stop breathing. If this test proves I am wrong, I will spend the rest of my life thanking God for blessing me with a faithful wife. If it proves I am right, I pray that bitterness never replaces compassion. The notebook slipped slightly in her hands. A test. The word echoed through her mind. Had everything, the disappearance, the rumors, the old clothes. Could it all have been? No. That would be impossible, wouldn't it? Her heartbeat quickened. Back inside the boardroom, panic slowly replaced confidence. One executive finally stood. I'd like to explain. You will, Beatrice replied. But first, she looked toward the entrance. There is one final person who should hear every explanation. The room turned toward the closed doors. Frederick whispered, "Who?" Nobody answered. Outside the boardroom, footsteps echoed steadily through the hallway. Not hurried, not dramatic, calm, confident. Inside the elevator, Kondwani adjusted the borrowed blue shirt Patrick had lent him. His beard remained. His shoes were still worn. He had deliberately chosen not to return in an expensive suit. Not yet, because he wanted every person waiting inside that room to recognize something first. Character, not wealth. He looked at his reflection in the polished elevator doors. For 3 months, he had lived as an ordinary man. He had discovered genuine friendship, anonymous generosity, honest labor, quiet joy. He had also witnessed betrayal, greed, fear, and the painful cost of judging people by appearances. The elevator doors opened. Lamech waited outside. Are you ready? Kondwani took one slow breath. No. He smiled gently. But the truth is, together they walked toward the boardroom doors. Inside, every conversation had stopped. Every eye stared toward the entrance. No one yet knew that the next few moments would change every life in that room forever. Silence settled over the executive floor as Lamech placed one hand on the polished wooden doors of the boardroom. Inside, no one moved. The executives who had spent months believing Kondwani Phiri had disappeared forever now waited in growing uncertainty. Lamech glanced toward Kondwani. It's time. Kondwani nodded once. Lamech pushed the doors open. Every head turned. For several long seconds, nobody spoke. The man standing in the doorway still wore faded trousers, worn leather shoes, and Patrick's neatly pressed blue shirt. His beard remained untouched, and the months spent living among ordinary people had darkened his skin beneath the Zambian sun. Yet there was something unmistakable about the way he stood. Calm, steady, confident. Jackson Nkoma was the first to recognize him. He slowly rose from his chair. Kondwani. His voice barely escaped his lips. The room erupted. Impossible! He's alive. I thought. Frederick's face turned completely pale. Moses stared in disbelief. For a brief moment, no one remembered the evidence sitting in front of them. They could only stare at the man they believed had vanished. Kondwani walked slowly toward the head of the table. Every step echoed through the silent room. When he reached his chair, he remained standing. He looked around carefully. Some faces showed relief. Others revealed fear. Several could not meet his eyes. Finally, he spoke. Good morning. His voice was calm, not angry, not triumphant, simply calm. I appreciate that everyone accepted today's invitation. Nobody answered. Kondwani rested both hands lightly on the back of his chair. 3 months ago, I disappeared. He paused. The newspapers believed I had lost everything. He looked around the room. Many of you believed the same. Frederick lowered his eyes. Kondwani continued. I did not disappear to escape responsibility. I disappeared to discover the truth. Another long silence followed. Beatrice stood and activated the large screen at the front of the room. Security footage appeared, contract records, financial transfers, meeting transcripts, photographs. One by one, every dishonest decision made during the previous months unfolded before everyone present. No exaggeration, no accusations without evidence, only facts. Frederick finally stood. Mr. Phiri, Kondwani gently raised one hand. Please, sit. The executive slowly obeyed. I gave every person in this company the same opportunity. Kondwani's eyes moved across the room. The opportunity to choose integrity. He looked towards several department managers. Some of you protected employees. Others shifted uncomfortably. Some protected yourselves. He turned toward Lamech. Lamech stood. You remained faithful to our principles. I simply followed the values you taught us. Kondwani smiled warmly. And for that, he looked toward the board. I am deeply grateful. Next, he looked at Beatrice. You protected this company without seeking recognition. She simply nodded. It was my duty. No, Kondwani replied gently. It was your character. He then turned his attention toward Frederick and the other executives involved in corruption. I will not humiliate you. The words surprised everyone. I have no interest in revenge. He slowly opened another folder. But actions carry consequences. One by one, formal dismissal letters were placed before every executive found guilty of misconduct. Some quietly accepted them. Others attempted to protest. One man whispered, I made a mistake. Kondwani nodded. You did. I can change. I hope you do. The executive looked confused. Then why dismiss me? Because forgiveness and responsibility are not the same. The room fell silent again. Kondwani continued. Our company serves thousands of families. He looked directly at every employee present. Trust is not a privilege. It is the foundation. If that foundation breaks, he gently closed the folder. Everyone suffers. No one argued. Jackson slowly stood. I owe you an apology. Kondwani looked at him. I allowed rumors to influence my judgment. You did. I should have trusted the man I knew. Kondwani extended his hand. Arl, what matters now is what you choose next. Jackson accepted the handshake. I intend to earn back your respect. I hope you will. Then Kondwani's eyes settled on Moses. The room became noticeably quieter. Moses attempted a smile. Kondwani, I was only trying to protect my sister. Were you? Moses hesitated. I believed. You believed my wealth was gone. Kondwani finished the sentence for him. Moses remained silent. You encouraged investors to abandon my company. You met with competitors. You celebrated my downfall before knowing the truth. Moses lowered his head. I was wrong. Yes, you were. Kondwani's expression remained composed. But this is no longer about business. He looked toward the door. It is about family. At that moment, another person entered the room. Thandiwe. She stopped immediately after seeing Kondwani standing at the front. Her breath caught. He was alive, healthy, standing before everyone. She looked from him to the evidence displayed across the screen, then to the dismissed executives. Finally, her eyes returned to her husband. Neither moved, neither spoke. The room quietly emptied as Beatrice and Lamech guided everyone outside. Within minutes, only 4 people remained: Kondwani, Thandiwe, Beatrice, Lamech. Kondwani turned toward his two trusted colleagues. "Thank you." Beatrice smiled gently. "We'll wait outside." The doors closed. Silence returned. For several moments, neither husband nor wife could find the words. Finally, Thandiwe whispered, "It was true." Kondwani nodded. "Yes." "The test?" "Yes." Tears filled her eyes. "I failed." He did not answer immediately. Instead, he walked toward the large window overlooking Lusaka. "I never wanted you to fail." "I know." "I wanted to be wrong." His voice became softer. "I prayed every day that you would open that gate. I prayed you would tell me none of it mattered." His shoulders rose with a slow breath. "But you didn't." Behind him, Thandiwe began crying openly. "I've replayed that day 1,000 times." "So have I." "I wasn't thinking." "You were." He turned to face her. "That's what hurt." She covered her face. "I cared more about what people would say than about the man standing in front of me." "You did." "I abandoned you." "You did." "I have no excuse." "No." Her tears continued falling. "I've visited the neighborhoods. I've met Grace. I've helped at the community center. I've seen the school. I've seen people who have almost nothing." She struggled to continue. "Yet they gave more kindness than I gave my own husband." Kondwani remained silent. "I finally understand." She looked directly into his eyes. "I wasn't poor because I lost money. I was poor because my heart became empty." Those words hung between them. For the first time since the test began, Kondwani saw no pride in her face, no concern for reputation, only sincere remorse. He slowly walked closer. "I cannot erase what happened." "I know. Neither can you." She nodded. "I know, but I also cannot ignore what I've seen these past months." He thought of my Ruth, Patrick, Grace, the children, the neighborhood that had embraced him without asking for anything. They reminded me that people can choose differently. He paused. "The question is," he looked gently into her eyes, "will you—" Thandiwe stepped forward. "I don't expect you to trust me today. I don't expect you to forgive me quickly. But if you allow me—" She wiped away her tears. "I want to spend the rest of my life becoming the woman you hoped I still was." Kondwani searched her face, not for perfect words, but for truth, and for the first time in many months, he believed he saw it. Outside the boardroom, the employees watched quietly through the glass walls. No one could hear the conversation, but everyone could see that something far greater than a business meeting was taking place. It was the beginning of justice, and perhaps the beginning of healing. The news spread across Lusaka before sunset. Employees whispered about it in office hallways. Delivery drivers discussed it during lunch breaks. Journalists waited outside Phiri Holdings headquarters, hoping someone would confirm the rumors. The founder had returned. The corruption had been exposed. Several senior executives had been dismissed. Yet the story people talked about most was something no newspaper could fully explain. Kondwani Phiri had walked back into his own company wearing the same simple clothes he had worn while living among ordinary people. He had chosen truth over appearances, and people could not stop talking about it. The following morning, Kondwani arrived at headquarters once again. This time, he still wore the borrowed blue shirt Patrick had given him. Employees gathered quietly in the main atrium. Some looked nervous. Others smiled with relief. Many simply wanted to see him. Lamek stepped forward. "Everyone's here." Kondwani nodded. He climbed onto the small platform normally used for company announcements. Looking across hundreds of faces, he recognized security guards who had worked night shifts for decades, receptionists who welcomed visitors every morning, warehouse workers whose labor kept the company moving, drivers who had spent countless nights away from their families, and office assistants who often received little recognition. He smiled warmly. "Good morning." The crowd answered together. "Good morning, sir." He gently shook his head. "For the past 3 months, very few people called me sir." Soft laughter spread through the room. And strangely, his smile widened. "Those months taught me more than the previous 20 years. Everyone listened carefully. "I discovered that respect offered to a wealthy man is common." He paused. "But respect offered to someone believed to have nothing," he looked around the room, "is priceless." Silence filled the atrium. "I also learned something about this company." His expression grew serious. "We built buildings. We built farms. We built transport networks. But our greatest achievement was never our business." He pointed gently toward the employees. "It has always been you." Applause erupted throughout the building. When the room became quiet again, Kondwani continued, "No honest employee will lose their position because of what happened." Visible relief spread across dozens of faces. "We will move forward together." The applause became even louder. Later that afternoon, Kondwani asked Lamek to arrange one more meeting. Not with executives, with everyone who had quietly supported him during his months away. The meeting took place not inside the headquarters, but in the modest community hall where Grace had organized the food drive weeks earlier. Ruth arrived first. She looked around in surprise. "I've never attended a business meeting before." Patrick laughed. "I don't think this is a business meeting." Grace entered carrying several of her students. Naomi arrived with fresh vegetables for everyone to share after the gathering. None of them knew exactly why they had been invited. A few minutes later, several company vehicles stopped outside. Kondwani stepped out. This time his beard had been neatly trimmed. His clothes were clean and simple, still modest, but unmistakably elegant. Patrick stared for several seconds. Then he laughed. "I knew it." Everyone turned toward him. "I knew you weren't ordinary." Kondwani walked over and embraced him. "I've never been more ordinary than I was with all of you." Ruth looked at him with tears in her eyes. "I suppose I should call you Mr. Phiri now." He immediately shook his head. "No. You'll always call me Kondwani." She smiled. "Good. I preferred that." The room filled with gentle laughter. Once everyone was seated, Kondwani stood before them. "I invited you here because each of you changed my life." He looked toward Patrick. "You taught me that honesty isn't a business strategy. It's simply the right thing to do." Patrick lowered his eyes modestly. He turned toward Grace. "You reminded me that investing in children creates a future no company can buy." Grace smiled softly. Then he faced Naomi. "You shared food with someone you believed could never repay you." Naomi shrugged. "My mother taught me that hungry people shouldn't be asked questions before they're offered a meal." Several people nodded. Finally, he looked at Ruth. His voice became quieter. "You opened your home to a stranger." She smiled through tears. "I opened my home to a human being." Those words touched everyone in the room. Kondwani took a slow breath. "I came here believing I was testing other people." He paused, but I was the one being transformed. He reached into a folder and handed several documents to Grace. "The Tomorrow Fund will no longer depend on anonymous donations." Grace looked confused. "What do you mean?" "It is now a permanent foundation." She slowly opened the documents. The fund would provide scholarships, school supplies, teacher training, and medical assistance for children and elderly residents throughout the region. The foundation would be managed by an independent community board. not by Kondwani alone. Grace looked up in disbelief. This is... She struggled to find words. Far beyond anything we imagined. Kondwani smiled. It belongs to the community. Applause filled the hall. He then handed another envelope to Patrick. Patrick frowned. What's this? A partnership agreement. Patrick opened it carefully. Inside was funding to expand his garage into a vocational training center where young mechanics could learn professional skills at little or no cost. Patrick looked stunned. I can't accept this. Why not? I don't have a business degree. Kondwani laughed gently. No. But you have something more valuable. What? Integrity. Patrick slowly smiled. I'll do my best. I know you will. Several days later, Kondwani returned to the mansion. Not because it felt complete again, but because healing required beginning somewhere. Thandiwe waited quietly in the garden. She had changed as well. The expensive parties had stopped. Much of her time was now spent volunteering with Grace's education programs and helping organize community health initiatives. She no longer did those things for recognition. Most people didn't even know she was involved. As Kondwani approached, she smiled nervously. I planted these. She pointed toward a row of young jacaranda trees. They'll take years to grow. He looked at the tiny trees. The best things usually do. They walked slowly through the garden together. Neither pretended that everything had been repaired. Trust was growing again, just like the trees, one careful day at a time. Thandiwe stopped beside one of the saplings. I still think about that day. So do I. I always will. He nodded. So will I. She looked at him. Does it still hurt? He answered honestly. Less than before. She reached for his hand. This time, he didn't pull away. Months later, the story of Kondwani's disappearance had become part of company history. New employees often asked whether it was true. Older workers simply smiled. Some stories were too important to reduce to rumors. They had to be lived. Every few weeks, Kondwani still visited Patrick's training center. He still attended school events with Grace. He still shared tea with Mai Ruth on her small front porch. Nothing about those friendships depended on wealth, and that was exactly why they endured. One evening, as the sun disappeared beyond the horizon, Kondwani opened the notebook that had accompanied him throughout his journey. On the final page he wrote, Wealth can build a house. Character builds a home. Money can attract a crowd. Kindness reveals a family. The greatest investment I ever made was not in business. It was in learning to see people before possessions. He gently closed the notebook. For the first time in many months, his heart felt at peace. The test had ended, but its lessons would guide the rest of his life. Every one of us will eventually face a moment when life strips away the titles, possessions, and comfort we have come to depend on. In those moments, the people who truly love us will not ask how much we own, where we live, or what we can offer them. They will simply ask, Are you okay? That is the difference between admiration and genuine love. Wealth can attract attention, but only character earns lasting respect. Kondwani's journey reminds that success is not measured by the size of a bank account, but by the kindness we show when no one is watching, and the integrity we keep when no one would blame us for taking shortcuts. At the same time, Thandiwe's story teaches an equally important lesson. People can lose their way when pride status and fear become more important than compassion. Yet sincere repentance, humility, and the willingness to change can begin the slow process of healing broken relationships. Forgiveness does not erase the past, but it allows a better future to be built one honest choice at a time. Before judging someone by their appearance, remember that every person carries a story you cannot see. The stranger wearing worn clothes may possess a heart richer than many who live in luxury. The greatest treasures in life are not houses, expensive cars, or successful businesses. They are loyal friends, faithful family, a generous spirit, and the courage to do what is right, even when no one is watching. In the end, those are the only riches that never fade. If this story touched your heart, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever experienced a time when someone judged you by your appearance or your circumstances? Or have you learned an important lesson about love, trust, or forgiveness? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience may encourage someone else who needs hope today. If you enjoyed this journey and want to watch more inspiring stories about faith, justice, compassion, and second chances, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss a new video.